Plume is different in so many ways. All right, we're taking the first step, and you're not going to make it alone. As a kid, I was acting in little plays. It felt like I was trying to make a circle fit into a square slot.
I had always identified as a lesbian, though masculine presenting, but even then it just didn't feel right. And so I started seeing a male therapist and it kind of just clicked.
Right.
I spent a lot of time alone in my room, staying up late, researching about what I don't understand. I realized that in Colombia, with my conservative family, it was simply not an option. I had the opportunity to finally leave my country and come here, and that's where I found Plume.
As soon as I knew what I needed to do, they were able to put my transition into my hands and be on a timeline that worked for me.
With Plume, I don't feel like I had to explain myself excessively. Outside of just the visits to get the testosterone, the support groups were the big pull for me. We're there for each other for everything, from emotions to relationships to stuff with parents.
I know that the care and the people are right there for me, just one text away. I feel comfortable to just put on some clothes and makeup and go outside and live my life.
In my future, I hope to be doing the things that I've always wanted to do that I feel like my dysphoria has held me back from.
What I want for myself is to be able to just live my life as who I am and be able to do the things that I love.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to be kicking off our very first virtual conference, PlumeCon 2025. Let's go. My name is Rai, pronouns she, her. I'm a trans femme person based in Ohlone Land, Oakland, California. I am the Community Education Program Manager here at Plume and just one of the many organizers who made PlumeCon possible for you all today. Just wanted to also say I love seeing all the different locations that people are calling in from. I got people from Boston, Maryland, Philadelphia, Colorado Springs, Minnesota, New York, Hawaii. Like, we're so spread out, and this is already just giving me so much life. So just thank you so much for being here. This is really what it's all about. We have a jam-packed 3-day long schedule of amazing speakers, also from all over the country. And we have so many stories, workshops, important conversations to be had over the course of this weekend. And I'm just so grateful to be in and to just build community with you all in this way. This is trans-led, this is community-driven, and this is free, which is what we deserve. Because I believe that this knowledge and these resources should be accessible and readily available for those who need it. I think we already struggle enough as queer and trans people to navigate a world that's not built for us and our safety in mind. Things like access to healthcare and medical transition, access to jobs and workplace safety, to competent mental health providers, housing and food, community and loved ones who see us for who we are, to express ourselves freely, and even to just feel safe on the streets. And for me, and I'm sure for a lot of us, it's heartbreaking to feel like these are things that are not possible for us sometimes, and that stepping into ourselves in our queer and trans bodies can introduce so much fear and anxiety that our dreams end up limited to just wanting to be seen and wanting to be safe. But I believe that these are all things that we deserve, not to just dream about and imagine, but to make into reality and more. And so with PlumeCon, we want to make space for the both and, to celebrate our lives and journeys, envision new possibilities, transform, to resist, find joy, to find and express our authentic selves, even in midst of the pain and the grief and the struggle of living in this world. And we also want to push back against a system that deems us not human, non-existent, not within their conception of reality and history that they're also fighting to actively erase. With that, needed to get that out of the way as part of the larger ecosystems of stories we'll be hearing over the course of this weekend. I am very excited to be having a conversation with Dr. Jerrica here. our Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Plume, to talk a bit about her story and journey as a trans provider, navigating her transition and the work that she is doing now. After that, I will go over some logistics on how to make the most out of your PlumeCon experience. And then we will close and start our next session, which would be Demystifying Therapy with Christine Fuston at 10 a.m. PST, 1 p.m. EST. But here we are, Jerrica. Thank you so much for joining us on a very, very special day. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here with all of you as well. I agree. It was so cool to see all the different states coming up and seeing folks from across the country. As Murphy's Law would have it, I have a little bit of a cold at first that came up like, Sunday night. But I've got my trans mug. I got my gin, my cha. So I am I'm ready to go and I'm very excited.
I have my Trans People Are Sacred mug. So we're out here. We're out
Yes.
here. Very special. I know that, we're all meeting you in a time of your life where I think you're very established now as a person and in the roles that you hold. But like all people, trans people have such a just unique and vast journey to get to where we are. And so I would love to hear a bit about where you grew up and also how did you end up becoming a physician? And if you also want to share some like earliest influences or experiences that shaped how you see yourself in like moving through the world too.
Yes, I would love to share. So I grew up in the Southeast. I see some Southeast representation here. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and I grew up in North Carolina, in Raleigh, North Carolina. So, it was kind of like a suburban upbringing, but deeply conservative. I grew up in, going to Southern Baptist Church. I was really, I think from, remember back to my elementary school days and onwards, just surrounded by a lot of bias, bigotry, right? And at that time, really showed up as racism and homophobia. Transphobia was hardly a thing then, it was, it all kind of came out as homophobia. And so I just was, being in that milieu was challenging. I wasn't even at a place in my life where I could, understand my gender identity for sure at that time. But I did not like what I was seeing around me, and I think those early experiences honestly shaped my kind of like what I wanted to do with my career. And as I got into high school, really just was drawn towards anything that was service oriented, right? Like helping folks that I think were left behind, that had fallen through the cracks in whatever way. And I had like an interest in I started to get interested in medicine in high school, but from a very like abstract perspective. It's like, oh, this is like a service-oriented field. This feels right, but I didn't know anything about it at the time. But speaking to those, I think transformative experiences for me, there's a lot of stuff from childhood that I could unpack, but only not until much later, right? And we'll talk about like the journey of being trans. But when I was in college, end of high school and in college, I started volunteering at an open door clinic, a free clinic in the Raleigh area. And for me, that was super eye-opening. I think just to see one, of course, get a glimpse into the healthcare system, but also see communities that were deeply underserved. And in North Carolina at the time, a lot of folks, from all backgrounds, but certainly a lot of Spanish-speaking individuals. And I just became really drawn to that. I think that notion of medicine as this vehicle for social justice. And that I was just like so turned on to that. And in college for me was just really like getting outside of that bubble that I grew up in. And funnily enough, I was still in Raleigh for college, but met some amazing people, and I think it's so hard to even like name all those people, but so many cool experiences volunteering at that clinic. I was part of a program in college that the whole theme of it was service and learning and service leadership and just like so many cool people that inspired me to think bigger than where I was at the time. Yeah, and I think really started to deeply understand social injustice, right? And what does that even mean? And how does it show up locally in my neighborhood, but also globally? And that was the pathway for me. I was like, oh, this is, like I think there's something here. I can like find a pathway within medicine that gets to all those things that I was seeing and hopefully making some kind of positive difference in some way. But that was where like the roots of it started. I was like, okay, we'll go into medicine. And I think there's so many different pathways, of course, I could have taken. But it was just that kind of combination of different things that led me there.
That's really powerful. And I didn't know that you used to work at like volunteering for free clinics. I think it's really special to it's both like it right double-edged, right? It's like special to volunteer for a place and serve your community, and it's also heartbreaking to witness the injustices, like how underserved our communities are and like the lack of resources that are available. I also used to work in a low-income free clinic in San Francisco, and it was really devastating to see how little resources are available for folks, especially for queer and trans people too, but for everyone in general, right? Um, but I'm also really curious to hear about, you know, as you're witnessing these different social injustices, as you're supporting folks who are in these underserved communities, what was it also like to navigate your own medical transition while practicing medicine?
Yeah, for me, that came a little bit later. We did undergrad and I went to medical school. Um, and ultimately decided to go into, because of course everybody has to pick a residency, a post-training after medical school. And for me, I picked family medicine. And I picked family medicine, which basically is kind of providing all care. You're on the front lines, but you're providing care to, everything from kids to adults to older folks, and doing procedures and just doing the full spectrum of care. And I was definitely drawn to that, but also family medicine has a history of definitely being like a more social justice oriented field, like deeply involved in the civil rights movement and the healthcare movement that kind of came up around that, and the founding of community health centers. And so that just sort of clicked with everything that I was, being exposed to and getting interested in undergrad. So I went into family medicine. It was in my residency where I really first started to even understand what is gender affirming care. I'd worked in HIV clinical trials research before medical school as a research coordinator, and certainly at that time, started to work with my community, like trans folks, queer folks, folks from all backgrounds. At that time, it was like again, didn't even like register to me that okay, this is who I am. Um, but as I got deeper into the gender affirming care work in residency and had an amazing mentor at the time who really wanted to build out a full spectrum LGBTQ plus curriculum for our family medicine residency. So the physician residents could learn, the faculty could learn, everybody involved in the residency. And she brought up that idea. I was like, absolutely, I want to be involved in this. And so we did that, but a big part of it was gender affirming care. And it wasn't something that was done, I'd say, certainly by norm at any clinic at that time, right? Outside of the very focused LGBTQ plus health centers. And this was kind of a small family medicine clinic in the basement of a hospital in Denver, Colorado. And so we spent a lot of time basically almost kind of doing what we did with Plume, but we built out a guidebook effectively, literally in a binder. This was all pre-digital days, put it in what we call the precepting room where everybody meets to talk about their patients and make plans, and then they go back and attend to their patients so that residents and physicians and nurses could pick up that book and be like, oh, this patient's here for their 3-month visit. This is kind of what's recommended by the guidelines. And even if they had never really done that care before, they could start engaging in it. So for me, that was the eye-opening moment to be like, wow, yes, this care is amazingly powerful and life-saving, even overnight life-saving. But it doesn't take that much to get other people involved in it and see the beauty and the power of it. And so that was the aha moment for me to say, like, I want to dedicate my career to this. Um, so I did, and we'll talk more about that. But getting to my personal transition, honestly, in retrospect, it was all those experiences that really helped me know who I am, right? Everything from those early days of working in the HIV clinic and then really learning and teaching gender affirming care and providing that care, meeting so many amazing trans people through the years. And it kind of came to this point where I had finished residency. I'd been in practice for about 4 or 5 years, actually working at a community health center. So I'd kind of come full circle in that vision of what I wanted to do with my career. And I think I just finally had space for my brain to breathe, honestly. You're super intense undergrad, go to medical school, go to residency, there's no time, hardly for anything, but much less to like meditate on who you are as an individual. And then it just kind of really just started to come up almost like this, this surge, this fountain. And I was like, wow, like, okay, this is whatever like way I'm living my life or, walking through life. This is not who I am, but it's something else. And then it just started to come up like so strongly. And really over the course of a couple years started to understand my own gender journey and who I was, and of course coming out as a trans woman. And so doing that in the course of medical practice is it's a little tricky. It's I would say exciting but scary. There's certainly the navigation of home life, right? And what does that mean when you come out and in terms of family, partners, kids, etc. Um, but then at work, you establish these like really close, intimate relationships, right? Doing patient care, you're talking with people about everything. It's such a vulnerable time, and so you develop these relationships, and then, you know, I come out, and you see patients every 3 to 6 months, sometimes annually, right? So then, like, all of a sudden, people would start coming in, and I never knew what I was going to find on the other side of that door. I will say, from a practice standpoint, the community health center I worked at was incredibly supportive, and that made that part of that journey so much easier. And I was really scared about that. I remember the day that I was like, okay, like I'm doing this. I can't like contain this anymore. I went and shopped for like my first outfits that really aligned with who I was. And I was like, I gotta like, I want to tell people, right? 'Cause, who I work with. And I talked to the chief medical officer at the clinic that I worked at, and I was like, I was kind of freaking out. And I called him. I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I tell like just the clinic I work at? How do like other people gonna know? Like, how are they gonna know about my name? And he was just like, you know what? Like, first of all, congratulations, which is exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. It wasn't like a question. It wasn't like, oh, tell me more. It was just congratulations. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you access to the full company listserv, and you're going to send an email if you want to. And I can send it for you. You can send it, whatever you want to do. And you can let people know. And that's what I did. And so I sent the email, I closed the laptop. I had like an admin day the next day. And so I was like, sent it on a Tuesday. I was like, all right, I'm not touching anything this whole day on Wednesday. And, I opened the laptop up Thursday morning, and yeah, I go into work, and it's just was this outpouring, all these emails of like, oh my God, like, congratulations. Like so happy for you. So that was an amazing start to that journey, coming out as a trans person, being a trans healthcare provider. And I know not everybody has, that opportunity, but was super helpful. And then when I went to see patients, yeah, it was still scary because I didn't know, I was working in a town north of Denver, pretty blue collar town, certainly a lot of, Christian Catholic influence. And, but, by and large, I like every time I went into that clinic room, even for folks where I'm like, not sure how this one's gonna go. They just like surprised me over and over, and I think part of it was you build those deep relationships, and that is one of the hard parts, of course, about what we're seeing now, right? It's so superficial. It's so like people get all these messages with no context, and develop narratives. But when you really know a person and they care about you, it's like it doesn't matter. It's like this is my doctor. Like this is this person who cares for me. And that was also, I think, eye-opening too, when thinking about, all right, how do we connect care to personal stories and narratives? But yeah, did that for, another year or so. And all the while, these kind of notions of Plume were bubbling up, and just like expanding access to gender-affirming care, and ultimately started Plume. But that was a little bit about that experience for me.
Incredible. The last parts when you were sharing about your experience with coming out to the CMO and then coming out to your team and then
Yeah.
to like your patients too, and all of it just being the surprise, I think there's so much joy there
Hmm.
around like having the expectations of so much fear and like anxiety, and then being met with so much like warmth and
Yeah.
belonging. And I think that really also highlights um like a quote that I think about a lot around what does it mean to move at the pace of the speed of trust? You know,
Mm,
when we build long-standing relationships and we're building them consistently over time, and when we're committed to the work that we're doing, like we build relationships and we're able to like present and also see like our full selves and their full selves in ways that are really vulnerable and maybe wouldn't be possible otherwise if it was in in this like superficial way. And I think that that can be that's like really so it really highlights the importance of community building. And I know that
absolutely.
that can look so many different ways too, in person, online, you know, but it can also be really difficult, especially in the midst
Yeah.
of a pandemic too, and just such a drastic shift in how we can
Hmm.
connect with our community and build those relationships with the people around us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I want to share one more experience about that, which was really poignant for me. And just to your point of like, community building and what does it mean when when we're able to be ourselves in different spaces. So I came out and I'm, starting to see, continuing to see patients. What was really cool is like then I had even like staff members who would come out to me, right, and be like, "Hey, like, I'm trans too, and can you be my doctor?" And but there was like so many special moments with because at that point I've been doing gender affirming care for a while, right, and so I had a lot of trans folks that I was taking care of, hundreds at that point, and those were really fun visits. Those were the ones where there was like no anxiety, and I think that was like the first time where I got to experience, I think, what we tried to build at Plume, right? We wanted to build this environment that, as you said, is like community driven. It's trust is inherent in the process, and you can walk in and you don't have to feel that anxiety you feel all the time. But as a physician, I could walk into the room. I knew I had a trans patient on the other side of the door, and and they're like, hey, and excited, and I'm like, hey, yeah, me too, happy to be here at the family. But those were really special moments too, just to share that with patients and feel that trust as a doctor, and we always feel about the trust that patients need, but that was really special.
It's amazing. Yes. And you perfect segue into this next question as you were talking about just the little seeds of maybe what it meant to build something like Plume.
Hmm.
Really curious about, yeah, at what point did you realize that you wanted to build something bigger and build
Yeah.
something larger for your own practice and for trans people?
Yeah, I love that question. And I love thinking about that journey for me. I mean, really, it all started back in residency. I think that was when certainly I had no notion of Plume. But in terms of thinking about building something bigger, and even if I rewind from there, uh, I mentioned undergrad, I was a part of this program that was really all about you know, service leadership and thinking bigger. And literally the motto of the program was think big. And I think I've taken that to heart my entire life. And it's like, okay, I'm doing this thing now, but what does it look like outside of my own existence, my experience with these people? And ever since I finished residency, I started teaching on gender affirming care. I did that locally. I certainly built up gender affirming care within that clinic system I was working in, both in that individual clinic and then across 13 clinics across Colorado. And then I would go and like talk at conferences and then go to other community health centers in other states. Be like, hey, like this is how you can do this. It's not that hard. It's really life-saving. And just literally train folks on it. And so that to me was like where that started was this is bigger than me. This is bigger than this clinic. It's obvious like this is a massive need and a lot of people are not getting that need met. So how do we level up the community? And medical school, nursing school, PA school, you name it, especially at that time and even now, there's rarely education specifically about gender affirming care and hormone therapy in that context, and of course everything that goes along with it. So that was the mission at that time. It's like, all right, I'm going to provide that education to the best that I can, so that everybody can start doing this. But that's a big hill to climb against, right? Because again, there's very little basis for this in the medical education system, and you're just constantly, um, you know, going uphill, pushing a massive boulder. And so I think for me, it was like, and especially as telehealth started to become a little bit more common, but pre-COVID, not still not that common. But I was in the clinic system I was in, I was like starting to do teleconsults because there's, again, across Colorado, it's a big state, and there's providers hundreds of miles away who were like, well, I have this patient, I want to care for them, don't really know what to do. It wasn't feasible for them to drive all the way to Denver. It was hard for me to drive all the way down there. So we started doing this like teleconsulting provider to provider. And in fact, as I kind of started doing more of that work, I was like, I would love to start a trans dedicated clinic. And for me at that time was an FQHC, because that's the world I lived in. I was like, how awesome would it be to have a trans specific, federally qualified health center in basically the mountain region? And I started to do the groundwork to figure out how to do that. But honestly, I kept running into roadblocks and red tape and bureaucracy in ways that I never imagined, right? It's like, oh, here's this great thing. There's a huge need here. Surely I can start a nonprofit clinic. But it was hard because of the regulations around nonprofit clinics, community health centers, and you can only have so many in a certain radius, and there's weird definitions of scope of care. So even though I wanted to do this thing that, generally wasn't being met by a lot of other clinics who were doing great work, it was really hard to actually get it going. And then that kind of brings it back to my relationship with my co-founder, Matthew. We were best friends from medical school. Really kind of got ourselves through medical school, a really hard time. And we stayed in touch through the years. He went out and did a ER residency in California. I was in Denver, obviously. And we would talk about what certainly what gave us joy in medicine, but also like what was hard, and there was a lot of burnout, right? Like you probably hear about healthcare provider burnout a lot now, but it's been going on for a long time. It wasn't talked about as much. And it is hard. Healthcare is hard. You see people, as we talked about, Rai, who are suffering. You want to get them that care, and you can't always do it. And on top of that, you have this like very, archaic systems when it comes to payment and health insurance, and all this stuff that just makes it hard to do the care. And so, I mean, personally, I was just facing a lot of burnout, but I knew, and I want to talk about this with Matthew, like the thing that kept me going was the gender affirming care. I knew that I could engage with that, and it would feel again just like so beautiful and powerful, and to be a part of that journey with somebody. So that's kind of, I think, where it really started from, was that background context of wanting to do something bigger, going through my own burnout, and then Matthew and I kind of like talking about, well, how could each of us do what we love to do, and in a way that like feels good for us and feels good for our patients.
Beautiful. Yeah, you had just touched on it a little briefly, but you had mentioned Matthew, who is also our other co-founder.
Yeah.
Very also curious, one, the journey of coming out to your best friend who you ultimately created a company together with.
Yeah.
And then what was that moment when you're like, let's do this together?
Yeah, I love that. I will say that was like never any plan to create a company together. We'd known each other for a long time at that point, but and Matthew, like he always has a lot of ideas. Like he's just such a, I think always thinking about problem solving. And for him, he had again done an ER residency, an ER physician, had been through a lot of personal challenges himself and with the healthcare system, and so I think had that lens. Um, but really was motivated to find a way to, how does the financial system of healthcare work, and how do you move through money through it in a way that creates access for care? And that's so hard to do, right, in any setting. And had started to work with other companies like in that early digital health movement. And at that time, it was like, things like Hims and Hers and ED pills and urgent care. But he was observing this pattern that things that were fairly focused in care, you could do them via telehealth or digital health well, and do it safely, and reach a lot of people, we were kind of talking about it, and it was certainly a light bulb moment for me as well, where I was like, oh, I've spent my entire career trying to expand access to care, teaching on it, doing it via like teleconsulting with providers. And yeah, like it was like, well, what if you just, and this is again pre-COVID, right? So that was not a thing at the time. But and I was like, yeah, this care is, it's so it can be so safely done in a virtual environment, right? As long as you have access to the tools you need, lab checks, etc. You can facilitate video visits, and I was like, this can totally be done. And I think it was just that thought of like, wow, like if I can take care of hundreds of people in this clinic in Denver where people are driving sometimes hours to get there, um, overnight I could see literally thousands of people, right? Like in environments and communities where there might not be any providers, or at least like clinics that people even feel safe going into. So that's kind of where it started. And in terms of like our personal relationship, yeah, we were like best friends at that time. They talked about it was a little later in life for me, and as I had that space for my brain to breathe, being in practice for a few years and starting to come into my own gender journey, and yeah, he's one of the first people that I came out to, and at that time, I think for many of us, right, it's like, okay, something's off here. Maybe I'm non-binary, and so that was kind of that moment. And it's similar. It's so funny. I think about that time with my chief medical officer, which came later. But when I told Matthew, and in fact, we were was visiting him in California. I was actually going to a trans health conference, one of my favorite trans health conferences that happens at UCSF. And we kind of like had started talking about this notion, of what would become Plume a couple months prior to that. And we were really excited. We're like, yeah, this definitely can be a thing. And like, oh my gosh, this is how it could work. And this is how we can set it up. And so, just you're in that like frenzied, excited brainstorming phase. And we had dinner and then we like walked to get ice cream. We're at this ice cream shop and I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm not binary. And the same kind of thing is just like, awesome. And like, give me a big hug. And then we like kept eating our ice cream, right? So it was just like, it was again, just
That's
exactly
so
the reaction
cute.
that
I
we
love
need.
that.
Wasn't a big deal. It was like warm and we're just like, we went on. And but that was the moment. And of course, I mean, he's been so supportive in every way, like from a personal standpoint, been through a lot since coming out. So he's been there from a personal level, but also, we ended up starting this company together and has always showed up with such humility. And so yeah, that's kind of how that came to be.
Wow. I love just the easefulness and the casualness and just the warmth that came from that. Yeah, that just makes me so happy. I feel like coming out can again just be so anxiety inducing and just the ways that it's
Yeah.
been easy and just yeah, accessible and just so warm brings me a lot of joy. And I think that there's so many different threads that you've been talking on, right? Things around like lack of education for queer and trans people,
Mhm.
all the red tape and just like archaic systems of
Yeah.
payment and navigating health insurance and burnout and all these different things. And that coupled with these experiences of like serving patients who are visiting hours away or talking to your best friend about these different things. Um, I would love to hear about what were some of your non-negotiables when you're shaping like your values for Plume, and also what do you think is the responsibility of an organization like Plume within this broader ecosystem of like queer and trans healthcare now?
Yeah. In terms of the values of Plume, I think where it really all started was we wanted to build expert gender affirming care from the community for the community, right? And when I say expert, it's not just the textbooks and the guidelines and the evidence and the research. That's certainly a part of it, and it can be important. But it's deeply understanding the lived experience of the people that you're serving, and in this case, the trans and gender nonconforming community. And we knew that to do that, like you have to have folks from the community, like full stop. And I think in a big way, and not always because of the intentions of the folks doing the care, but just sometimes by nature of our systems and bias and discrimination and institutionalized oppression and all the things and the way the population is distributed, if you walked into a clinic doing gender affirming care, it was rare you'd actually see a trans person. It was great that they were doing it, and that they cared about you enough to do that care and learn about it. But we know that, more than half of trans folks were teaching their providers like how to care for them. That's not supposed to be the right direction. And it was so rare to see trans folks in that space. And so that really was like, okay, this needs to be a part of this care no matter what. And I think if you can include people from the community serving the community, then a lot of it takes care of itself, right? And I think, and that's where a lot of the kind of the values that we live by today come from, and even the values that we've created as a company, like we've done exercises a couple different times of defining those values and bringing in people from the company who, of course, are many of them are TGNC identified themselves and a lot of amazing allies, and making those values. So, but from, just like the core of the care, it's just high quality, affirming care experience that's informed by the community.
Totally. Yeah. And when it comes to even on the more politically escalated times too, I think a lot about for Florida, right? When
Mm.
a lot of the access to healthcare was being slashed. Could you talk a little bit about how Plume had navigated those situations and also just like what does the advocacy look like from our side of things?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Florida was definitely one of those extremely challenging situations, right? And a byproduct of this wave of anti-trans politics that we've seen building really over the last 5 to 7 years that's now come to a head. But we're seeing a lot of it, of course, nationally now, federally, but it's been happening at a state level for years. And Florida was definitely the first example of like a really overt restriction of healthcare for trans folks, legislated by law, and in this case, impacting adults. And what it did is it required this in-person consent, right? But even before we got there, it was a lot of things that were just very onerous, right? And it would be so hard to even like conduct the care and have a patient get there. And that was purposeful, right? They wanted to put blockers in front of the care. And so ultimately we had to figure out how to adapt to that. And that was, I mean, that's been the name of the game for the last, gosh, 4 or 5 years. And we started 6 years ago. So it's most of our existence has been like just dodging things and jumping hurdles and trying to keep going and surviving. But with Florida, so we had to figure out how to, create that in-person experience. We were fully virtual, right? We were fully virtual across the country. That model was very intentional to create access and an affirming experience, and it was working really well. And then all of a sudden, we had to show up in person. And you talk about, or you asked about before, like, well, what are those like meaningful moments of people you come across? And honestly, there's just like countless individuals, and I think that's a really good example. That actually reminds me of when we first started. So when we first started Plume, we had the virtual model in mind. It was a small pilot. It was just me with an iPhone, basically seeing patients on my lunch break. But what we would do to start care is we would do these little pop-up clinics and in different parts of Colorado, since that's where I was. And we bring people in, and it was partly to get to know them. But at that time, there was like some regulatory stuff around testosterone in particular. All that stuff had not been waived at that time. And so we would get people started in person. And then we would, of course, do all their care virtually after that. And we literally would like stick a sign on the window of a clinic. But we're like, how are we going to find a clinic? And people would come out of the woodwork and when they found out what we were doing, and they'd be like, hey, like this is amazing. This needs to exist in the world. I have this therapy clinic here. Just like come in and use the space. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'll pay you rent. Like what are they like? No, just like come here. Like I'll leave it open on the weekend. You can see a few patients so I think it's just like generosity and willingness to help from a lot of people along the way, right? But we saw that with Florida too, because we weren't in a position to build a bunch of clinics, like very few people are ever, especially in a healthcare world where it's so costly to even provide care. Unless you're some massive system, you can't just start spinning up clinics. And so we found partners on the ground in Florida, right? Folks that were really aligned with the mission, community centers, therapy clinics, wherever we could find brick and mortar space. And we started seeing people, right? And getting those consents done. And we're still doing that to this day and seeing people in Florida. But that's, I think, one example of how we've had to adapt. But the adapting is like that's the part where you're actually putting it in action. But so much happens behind the scenes of even just understanding the landscape. We're constantly scanning legislation And I think we've all heard these numbers, literally thousands, like over 1,000 anti-trans bills alone in this year, close to that in the last 3 to 4 years on an annual basis. And so, there's just so much to read and keep up with and understand how does that impact how we can provide care. We've certainly seen scares in other states too, Ohio, Missouri, to name a couple, that where we push back too. Like, and I think you ask about how does advocacy show up. One, it is like understanding the legislation, being able to adapt to it, but also speaking out. And we've done like public comment in many cases of rules that were coming from health department boards or medical boards or GAs in certain or AGs in certain states. And then we saw those things like not go forward, right? And with a lot of speaking up from the public. And so yeah, it's I think it shows up in all those different ways. And importantly, just like creating relationships with other at legal allies in the space. And there's a lot of amazing individuals who are doing the legal advocacy work like in full, right? You hear about, ACLU and Lambda Legal and so many other organizations, A4TE, and we've gotten to know them through the years, and it's been amazing to know them, support each other, and so that's been a big part of it as well.
Really beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think the when I think about the thing that you had said a bit ago around the red tape and
Yeah.
or the possibilities of the red tape of moving through healthcare as like federally qualified and the roadblocks and the bureaucracy. And yet, even when you're trying to carve these paths to create this as accessible as possible, you're still facing constant hurdles and obstacles and more red tape and, having to have experienced just like the increased hostility. And it also, yeah, it just makes me think a lot about the lack of access for a
Mm,
lot of us
mm,
within the broad community overall, people who live in rural places, people who don't have access to providers in their hometown, who, yeah, are driving like hours and hours away. And that on top of all of this difficulty too, just for wanting to exist in our bodies in ways that we can feel like authentic to ourselves and for us to find joy and just care and all of these different things. I'm really curious to hear about, for you, what, how has this onslaught impacted you personally as
mm,
also like a trans person during this
mhm,
time of this increased hostility? And then taking that in the broader context too, how do you think about trans community resilience during this
mm.
time of increased hostility?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Um, I, I'm exhausted. I'll say that much. As I'm sure we all are. I think resilience is a word we use a lot, right? And almost to the point where it can become cliched, but it's so important. And I've learned about that for myself in a way that I never thought I would be able to learn. And so these notions of self-care become extremely important, right? And it is exhausting. And I think there's the weights we carry in so many different ways, right? It can be just being a trans person in our family, our community, um, working with the trans community, if that's your job. Um, and you can feel, we all feel that compassion, right? And so I think there's this certainly that fatigue, compassion fatigue, because we're constantly caring for others and we want them to be okay. So that's just like one part of it. But then, of course, if you're um, I don't know why that popped up. That was weird. Okay. Apparently there's two of me. But yeah, and I think on top of that, as you said, if you're having to navigate all these challenges that people are putting in front of you, then it makes it even more fatiguing. So for me, it's a hard lesson to learn, and I think it probably took me honestly like years of doing this work. You have the excitement of starting something like this, of course, and reaching people, and you get energized by that. And I still take energy from that every day. I think just knowing the work you're doing is impacting others. But that can only go so far when you're personally just like maybe feeling really stressed and anxious. And so I think you have to, for me, it's been like a matter of being able to just like stop, right? And pause and breathe. And I have compartmentalized a lot in my life, much to my fault. And so part of the coming out journey was like, okay, how do I not compartmentalize so much? And I think just finding a better balance, because when you do this work, and you are trans, it stays with you all the time, right? I think there's no leaving work at work. That's what we talk about a lot. And I certainly feel that. You go home, you see the headlines, maybe you're facing something personally, and you can't just leave it on your desk. So it does require a lot of just like really intentionally taking the time and the space to do something else, do something different as much as you can, clear the head a little bit. For me, athletics has been like a big part of my life, and that's complicated, right? In the times we live in now, with the bias and discrimination we're seeing with trans folks in sports. But I try to find those outlets, and one really cool thing that I found in the past year is this women's hockey league here in Denver that's been super supportive and inclusive. I'd never played hockey before, by the way. That was not a thing that I did. But I was just like, oh my God, these times are wild. Like, I need to find like a little bit of airtime here, find an escape, and just happened to be talking to some folks in this really cool, like, queer founded little sports bar, and they mentioned it, and I was like, that sounds fun. I think I'll do that. And it's been such a, my gosh, like such a breath of fresh air just to show up, like be myself in a space where I can move my body, and just feel included and supported. And it's not a thing. So that's been personally very helpful for me. But a lot of it, yeah, it's trying to like separate out as much as I can, really take the good energy from the work that I do, and but have those moments where I can just kind of like put it aside, at least, if I can for like a few minutes or a couple hours, and then come back to
For sure. I feel you on the exhaustion.
it.
That is very, very real. And I think that, when it comes to the grief and like the struggle of moving through this world, the energy of like hope and then hopelessness and hope
Mhm.
and hopelessness and the grief and joy. It's just constantly
Yeah,
ebb and flow, right?
yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that um, and we talk about community this and community that, but like what does that really, really mean too,
Hmm.
what does that mean in our interpersonal lives when we're struggling with our mental health, and who is there to support us when we need it,
Yeah.
when our rights are being taken away, like who is advocating for us in like the legal standpoint, even if we don't know who these people are, like
Hmm.
do they have our backs? Like for healthcare providers, are they still providing the care,
Hmm.
even if there's a lot of like scrutiny or just a lot of potential like mm, the I'm losing the word, but yeah, just like the sentiment of like potentially like losing their license or experiencing a lot of like doxing from other
Hmm.
communities that aren't supportive of our folks. The 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 consistency of what it means to be in community is like the through line as to how we will get through all of this, right? And that can
Right.
show up in so many different ways, just like internally, interpersonally, just like broader community overall, and then even just like globally too, right? Like we
Yeah.
all deserve to be in a world where we don't have to feel like we have to be resilient. I think resiliency is almost not a choice for us. And I would like for us to be in a place where, we can just enjoy and build our lives the ways that we want to.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and that actually reminds me of the question that you asked is like, well, how do we see ourselves as Plume and in the broader scheme of things, right? And what is our responsibility? Um, we're a care provider, right? So I mean, first and foremost, we're here to provide care to folks. But I do think, as I was talking about before, it goes beyond that. And our vision that we have at Plume is to transform healthcare for every trans life. And we really take that to heart. And we're not going to provide care to every trans person, obviously, right? But we're going to provide care to a lot of people. And the hope is that how we show up in the world influences the experience for trans folks, or for providers taking care of them in a positive way. So part of that comes from that advocacy work, right? It's like, well, if we can work an allyship to, make sure a bill doesn't go forward, right? Or so that something gets reversed and overturned. Obviously, that's not just impacting us and our patients, it's impacting everybody. But also, just to your prior points of like, we just want to be able to show up in the world as ourselves and be seen and not have to live in fear. And I think that's ultimately what it goes to, right? We want to, through the work of doing healthcare, medical care, but also community care, create those spaces. And again, cliched phrase, right? But be that change we want to see in the world. And I think if we keep doing this, we will see that change, right? And it's super hard right now. There's no question. Um, but but I do believe like we will move through that. And the more we're doing this work on whatever level that is, national level, local level, community level, um, it's so important, and it'll play out over time. But yeah, so I think there's so many ways that we can impact each other. And the last piece that's like a little bit more concrete is research, right? And I'm a clinician, I'm a physician. I've participated in research in different scenarios, but even at Plume, we've had the ability to do that. And one of the cool things is because like we're taking care of a lot of folks, right? It's very rare you have a clinic system where you have 15,000 plus trans folks. And so we've been able to, publish studies. We've been a part of like 13 studies over the last 6 years to help influence the way that trans folks get care, right? And provide that lens where it's not just care informed by the community, but also research informed by the community, which is very, that's something that like a space where there's still a lot of opportunity for many marginalized communities. But that's another way, right? Where it's just like, it's not just the care we're doing, but that is a resource that can be helpful for people literally around the world.
Totally. When you're talking about like, yeah, also reflecting on the wanting to feel safe and wanting to move through the world as the way that we are, um, I also think that feeling safe is the minimum, right? That's baseline.
Hmm.
Being able to move through the
Hmm.
world as ourselves is the minimum.
Yeah,
Access to competent care is the minimum. These are baseline things. These
absolutely.
shouldn't be dreams, they should be rights, right? These should be our
Hmm.
foundation, and that we deserve to dream bigger. Um, Having our dreams limited to safety in our bodies and access to the care that we need and deserve to do such a thing, um, is not dreaming, that's survival. And like, I feel like we have such capacity to be able to dream as we are dreaming ourselves into reality, right? Um, being, I think a lot about transness as going into this off-road path that you feel like nobody has traversed before.
Mm.
And you just like discover your own path, and then you realize that there are other trans people who are doing the same thing in their own unique ways. Like, how are we dreaming? How are we like, yeah, we're literally becoming like our dreams. We're making that into reality, and we deserve to have more. Like,
Mm.
we're creating ourselves beyond our imagination,
Yeah.
And I want to be able to like hold that and like nurture that in a way where that energy doesn't get lost. And so I think with that closing last question for you, um, we've talked a lot about a full scope of different things, right? From past, present, and even just like hopes for the future.
Hmm.
But if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would
Mm.
you tell it now?
Oh my gosh, what a question. And also, I love that. I think that should be our new slogan now, becoming our dreams. That was great. But yeah, what would I tell myself when I was younger? I I think about this moment, so I'll get very specific, and this connects back to, that like journey as a kid and what I, was able to really understand in retrospect. And looking back, you see all these moments where it's like, oh my God, that was me, like trying to be there and come through. But it's hard when you live in that environment that doesn't acknowledge that at all, and if anything, is like very counter to it. But there was this moment where I was probably uh, eight, so in that 6 to 8 year old range. And it was Christmas time, and I had my cousin like ask her, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas?" And I had told her I really wanted this Gem doll. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Gem and the Holograms, amazing cartoon from the 80s. But I wanted a doll, and which, for me, gosh, like North Carolina, Southern Baptist family, that was not really a thing that you did. But I told her, and then she got it for me for Christmas, and I was sitting there on the couch with like my siblings and other cousins and stuff. And I had it's the weird stuff that we do, right? I had like even like blacked out and forgot that I had um, asked her about that, and so she presents it to me, and it was the weirdest reaction, but I started crying. I was like, why did you get that for me? Like I didn't want that, and I was like embarrassed and all these things, and but of course, like that doll was just I think for me like that was the symbol for me at the moment, and that's what I could hold on to. Even though I didn't feel even the like awareness, safety, comfort to just like express myself in a way that I think in my heart I wanted to. So that became like a really favorite like thing or toy, for me. But it was all like in secret, like in private, and I didn't, I was like afraid to share that with other people, and obviously was very ashamed. Um, and so what would I tell myself? I'd say, I'd go back to that moment and I'd be like, girl, like be who you are. Like fucking love that doll. Wave it around, show it to everybody. Take it with you to school. Like, you do you. And I think that would have been really cool just like to have somebody just to say like, no, you don't need to cry about this. That's ridiculous. This is a moment to be proud. So I think that's what I would tell myself.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jerrica, for just joining me in on this conversation and just getting to share your life and your experiences. And yeah, I love getting to hear about your younger self too. And all of this just warms my heart so much. And I think it's the perfect way to get started with PlumeCon.
Absolutely.
I know that we're at 2 minutes before Christine's session starts. And so I want to make sure that I give proper space on letting folks know how to make the most out of their experience. I feel like I would want to do like a more proper closeout, but I got to do a little bit of rushing since we're at time. Just couldn't stop the conversation, it was too juicy. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, but thank you so much for doing this with me. I want to make sure that everyone, is able to make the most out of your PlumeCon experience. So here's a little bit of a note before you go. As you probably have seen already, you have access to a lobby with a conference schedule and ability to bookmark and view a live streaming section in the main lobby section. Um, Here's like a video on what that navigation looks like. You can see different speakers with their bios and the sessions that they are hosting. You're able to bookmark your favorite sessions to live on your itinerary. You can also review your full schedule on the sessions tab with different things like date, topic theme, audience. See the full schedule. We got day 1, 2, and 3. You can see the session description, and you're able to join the sessions 20 minutes before it starts. So, as you can see, this is the itinerary. Once you click start, you get a pop-up on Zoom, and then boom, that's how you're here. That's how you're here. Next up, some reminders about this space, right? This is a safe space for queer and trans folks to come together, share knowledge, build skills, foster connections. We welcome the intersections of our identities that we hold and the stories that we hold. This space is available and open for our broader LGBTQIA community and allies as well. However, transphobia would not be tolerated here, but in terms of the ways that we can engage with each other, definitely encourage engagement. I see so many messages popping off in the chat, which I love. Ask questions or reflections, talk on audio and be on camera. Take what works for you, leave behind what doesn't, and also take breaks to stay engaged. You do not need to attend every session. There's a lot of sessions, but if you did, that'd be awesome. Yeah, feel free to join a variety of different session styles. We have panel discussions, workshops, presentations. We have a virtual swag bag that our community and wellness team has so beautifully compiled. And these are all community resources, tools, and more. And then I'll talk a little bit about Prism as well. That is our community space. But this is what our community virtual swag bag looks like. We have things like, yeah, discount codes from speakers and partners from various organizations. You can also see things like queer and trans book recommendations, journal prompts, things on navigating like surgery processes, et cetera, et cetera. I am going a little fast, so. Next up, Prism. If you are able to RSVP via the conference pass, you will gain access to the check-in desk and for FAQs, main stage for descriptions, but most importantly, live feed for live updates and reactions from our speakers and from yourselves. And very especially, we will have the attendee lounge for folks to chat with each other and other conference goers in real time. And also a few of our speakers will also have a post-session discussion in the space too. Luckily for you, this is going to be free for PlumeCon and actually free for the next 6 months. So you don't have to pay for this. If you want access, all you need to do is join in 6 months free with the code PlumeCon, all caps, at getplume.co/community. You must RSVP on PlumeCon via Prism on the conference pass in order to gain access to the chat and lounge space. But you can also, outside of PlumeCon, gain access to the whole Prism community where we have trans support groups, weekly hangouts, workshops, topic-focused discussion spaces, resource libraries, discount codes, all the different things. So please join us. Please join us there. I would love to see you there. I would love to chat with you. And we got our whole community waiting for you. I don't need to go through the whole session schedule because we are coming up on time, but the next session that's happening right now is Christine's Demystifying Therapy, which I'm really excited about. If you are just getting started in your therapy journey or are learning on how to navigate just the process of therapy, searching for your therapist, etc., that's the way to go. Day 2 schedule, day 3 schedule. This is all information that's in the email that you had received on the note before you go. And that is it. I would love to just like close off with a quote from Miss Major Griffin Gracie. She was a legendary trans rights activist, 78 years old. She passed away on October 13th. I feel like this really encapsulates everything that we have shared. She says, "I don't need their permission to exist. We have a culture, we have a history, we have a reason to be here, we have a purpose, we're entitled to be loved and seek happiness and share that with the people that we care about." So that is the end of this opening plenary. Please join us in Christine's session that's happening right now. And I hope to see you just overall throughout the entire conference too. I'll be present at a number of different sessions. So yeah, thank you so much everybody for being here. And let's go PlumeCon. Come on.
Thanks everybody. Have fun. Enjoy it.
Take care. Bye.